Honorable resource persons, Board of Director and Manager of CME-Rec Fund, all respectable participants, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to CME-Rec Fund's International Webinar on Nutrition and Disease Series. And today we will discuss syntax as public health measure. My name is Grace Wange from CME-Rec Fund, and I'm also an alumni of Southeast Asia Nutrition Leadership Program. And today I will be your master of ceremony. In the next couple of hours, we will discuss the use of tax as one of the public health measures and look on some best practices from different countries. This webinar is held as part of commemoration of No Tobacco Day, celebrated globally every year on the 31st of May. And this event also supported by grant managed by International Union Against Tuberculosis and Lung Disease, the Union, and funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies. Before we go to the next agenda, I would like to remind you on the general rules of this webinar. First, participants are expected to enter YouTube channel on time. The use of headphones is highly recommended. Questions for research person can be asked throughout the webinar by filling in the link provided, and later moderator will select and read the question during the discussion. We will select two questions as the best question to get prizes. The link to the evaluation form will be shared prior to the end of the webinar. Participants are expected to fill out the evaluation form as their proof of attendance. The certificates will only be given to participants who completed the evaluation form. The certificate themselves will be available 2 weeks after this webinar. So for any updates, please regularly visit our website and social media. And of course, be sure to subscribe and like CME-Rec Fund YouTube channel and follow our other social media outlets. So ladies and gentlemen, before we start our today's main session, let's hear and pay respects to the CME songs and CME colors. Okay, we're still waiting for the songs and the CME colors to be played.
It's time to open our eyes to a bright and promising future. We'll rise to the call of the time. By promoting knowledge and policies, we can build a better world. Let us take a stand for our visions alone, making future plans for the people to grow in a life filled with happiness and clean. Hear us sing, building the future is our legacy. We'll achieve our goals through partnership, creating opportunities. By working hand in hand, we can accomplish all our dreams. For a better quality of life is now within our reach. Let us take a stand for our visions alone, making future plans for the people to grow in a life filled with happiness and clean. Hear us sing, building the future is our legacy.
Yeah, we already heard and a small introduction on Simeo. And now I would like to invite the director of Simeo Rekfon, Professor Mukhtaruddin Mansur, to give his welcoming remarks. Prof. Mansur, the time is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Grace. Hello, very good morning, afternoon in some part of Australia, and early morning in South Africa to all of you. I'm very proud that you will attend fully the webinar. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, I would like to emphasizing the background of the Simeo Rekfon, which has a mandate of a nutrition program, has a concern about the tobacco control. As commonly known, smoking contributes significantly in adding number of non-communicable diseases cases and is linked with increasing risk of malnutrition, including stunting. Indonesia, NCDs and stunting have become a major public health concern. These two public health problems, control and preventions, are closely related to the tobacco control. It is known that Indonesia counts as countries with highest smoking rates, unfortunately, which 1/4 of its population are smokers. One of the effective strategies to reduce cigarette consumption, as recommended by WHO, is to raise tobacco excise. Studies suggest a 10% increase in cigarette excise tax would reduce cigarette consumption by 0.9 to 3%. Increasing tobacco and cigarette taxes could lead to the reduction of cigarette consumption that would eventually reduce smoking attributable morbidity and mortality. The funds generated by tobacco tax can be directed to support the tobacco control activity and include public health campaign. By creating the fiscal space to finance public health programs, and at the same time, reducing tobacco use is a win-win policy for government. Countries like the Philippines has implemented so-called sin tax reforms by increasing tobacco tax and allocate the revenue to improve public health finance. In this webinar, we look forward to learn from examples in other countries that implemented how this tobacco tax policy could create win-win policy for public health so that appropriate measure could be done. This webinar will talk about one, the use of sin taxes to support public health nutrition, and second, tobacco taxation in Indonesia and its contribution to national healthcare finance. We extend our most gratefulness for the speaker, Bletcher, PhD, economist in fiscal policies for health and WHO, and Dr. Abdillah Ahsan, SEMSE, from the Faculty of Economy and Business, University Indonesia. And thank you, the moderator, Dr. Indah Suci Widiahening, PhD, for the support in this webinar. I warmly welcome a registrant from Brunei Darussalam, Malaysia, Philippines, South Africa, and beyond, including Indonesia. Wish you great learning experience in this webinar session. We hope that the knowledge and skill you gain from this webinar will further be shared to your colleges and could be implemented in your professional work. Thank you, the committee of this webinar, for their hard work, CNLP alumni, and Union Bloomberg for the providing support for this webinar. I wish you all a very successful session. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Back to you, Dr. Gais. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mansur. So, dear participants, I would like now to introduce our moderator of today, Dr. Indah Suci Widiahening, PhD. Dr. Indah is our research manager, but she is also an associate professor from Faculty of Medicine, University of Indonesia, from Community Medicine Department. She's also a Bernard Loan Scholar from Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health in Boston. Her research mainly focuses on non-communicable diseases and primary care services. So, without further ado, Dr. Indah, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Grace, for the introduction. Now I will continue with our main session for today. Here we will have two very important topics presented by two distinguished speakers in this field. Now I would like to introduce our first speaker, Bletcher. Okay, so yeah. Evan is an economist in the fiscal policies for health team at the World Health Organization headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland. Prior to that, he already led several, he works in several organizations related to the tobacco control and prevention of non-communicable disease. And he also holds a PhD in economics from the University of Cape Town. His research focus is on tax policy and the influence of tax policies on health behaviors, particularly in low and middle income countries, and already published many publications in this field in various reputable journals. So I think I will now stop the introduction and give the opportunity to Evan to deliver his talk today. Evan, the time is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning and be with you all. I've spent a lot of the last 3 or 4 years working quite extensively in the Southeast Asia region, and one of the biggest frustrations over the last year has been, due to COVID, the inability to be spending more time in the region, specifically in Indonesia, where I spent a lot of time over the last few years. I'm speaking to you this morning from Australia. I'm here visiting my family at the moment, and hopefully, stuck here for a little while with my family rather than far away in Switzerland. What I want to speak about this morning, what I've been invited to speak about, is to talk about the use of excise tax policies within to support public health, nutrition, and to some extent NCDs. What I would like to focus on this morning is a little bit of experience on some countries. I'm going to refer a lot to my home country of South Africa, partly because South Africa's had a phenomenal experience in designing and implementing taxes to support health on tobacco, which I think is a big priority in Indonesia and in the whole of the Southeast Asian region. But also we'll look towards alcohol and food as well, and look at how fiscal policy instruments, particularly tax instruments, affects behavior in this area. One thing I want to focus on quite extensively is how we design taxes. I think this is a big challenge in the Southeast Asian region, and not just a practical challenge, but an important challenge of in order to ensure that we get the maximum health benefit from these instruments that are very, very powerful. So just to get going, I want to sort of just cover briefly what we mean by some of the terminology. I think we hear a lot about various terms being used. Health taxes is becoming a commonly used term these days. I think we also hear the term pro-health taxes, but also we also hear a lot the term sin taxes, and I want to cover quickly what we mean by them. Health taxes are any tax that's imposed on a product which has a negative public health externality. So tobacco, alcohol, we see more commonly on sugary sweetened beverages, but also we could see taxes on fossil fuels as health taxes. Obviously, I think fossil fuels contribute significantly to air pollution, and there's a growing attention being paid to the contribution of fossil fuels to health through climate change. And so a health tax is effectively a tax that's used to try and account for that negative public health externality. What we find is that these taxes are able to reduce the use of these products. So they're able to reduce tobacco use through smoking prevalence, increased cessation, reduced smoking intensity. With alcohol, we find that it reduces the heaviness of drinking, it reduces concentrated drinking, and with sugary sweetened beverages, it has significant power in its ability to really encourage product reformulation and reduction of sugar content. We also find that these, as with most taxes, they generate revenues. At the end of the day, governments need revenues in order to provide important social and public services, whether through health, education, infrastructure. And in order to pay for these, we need revenues. And in order for revenues, for most countries, they're going to be highly dependent on taxes to provide those revenues. What we do know is that these excise taxes, these narrow focus taxes, are relatively efficient in their ability to raise revenue with the limited resources required to implement and administer them, even in low capacity environments. We're starting to see a lot more attention being paid to understanding the range, a broader range of taxes and how they influence health, but I'm not going to focus on them today. But we do certainly know that other taxes, including Social Security contributions, can effectively have significant health implications. Should we call them sin taxes? This is a term that is to some extent a historic term that I'm not particularly fond about. However, it's still commonly used as a term in many countries. For example, in the Philippines, it's very much focused as branded as a sin tax. I don't really like the term because it effectively it effectively is putting a stigma on the individual behavior. I don't think people should be stigmatized for smoking or for drinking or poor nutrition or poor diet. And sometimes referring it to sin can create that sort of stigmatization. So it's not a term that we favor, but yet we recognize that this is a term that is used in some countries, and they can be used interchangeably. Health taxes, sin taxes can be used interchangeably. It's just a personal preference. So now that we've sort of got that terminology out the way, we can talk a little bit about the economic case for these sorts of taxes. And in order to do that, we really need to understand both the economic and fiscal perspectives here. The case for imposing them is based on, as we've previously spoken about, this negative externality. And what we mean by the negative externality is the consumption of these products creates high external costs on society. So a smoker doesn't, necessarily the price that consumers pay for cigarettes or alcohol doesn't necessarily reflect that high cost to society. The internalities is a second argument that's made in favor of them, which is around how people deal with issues around the future costs of them and time inconsistent preferences and addiction, etc., of the products. And so this is really what frames the economic case for taxing these products, that we want to correct for the negative externality and we want to correct for the internality. The revenue generation part is back to this fiscal issue that governments need revenues in order to function as a government, and that they need to raise this revenue from somewhere. However, we also need to take into account that all taxes are not made equally, and that the broader economic effects of taxes can vary quite a bit. We can consider the incentives they change. When we change a tax rate, or we change taxes, or we implement new taxes, they will change the incentives for people in the broader economy, and they'll also have distributional consequences. And what we mean by that is the effects on equity from raising those taxes. And those are some things to keep in mind as we'll talk through some of these challenges going forward. Some sort of history on health taxes. I think we generally have seen most of the work globally and most of the experience globally coming around from tobacco taxation. And we've had a lot of momentum on tobacco taxation globally over the last 20 plus years. We really started to see a big emphasis on tobacco taxation in low and middle income countries from about 1999, when the World Bank published a seminal publication called Curbing the Epidemic. It was one of the first publications that from an international, from an economic institution, should I say, that really tried to make the economic rather than purely the health case for tobacco taxation. And we've seen a number of influences over the last few years that have really driven this forward, from the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control to several important WHO interventions, the Empower Technical Package, our Technical Manual on Tax Administration, and then the FCTC Article 6 guidelines. We don't really have this architecture for alcohol and sugary drinks and these other broader areas of health taxes. This is still sort of a developing area. We've started to see some development in this area with the Safer Technical Package, which from WHO, which focuses on alcohol, and the WHO Best Buys and Recommendations for NCDs, which labels alcohol taxation as what we call a best buy, in that it's a cost-effective solution, and SSB taxation as a good buy, which is also a cost-effective solution, but at a slightly lower rate. It has an ability to prevent DALIs at a cost of more than $1 PPP per DALI, whereas a best buy is less than $1. So it's just the order of magnitude that we talk about. Briefly, what are the types of taxes that we're talking about here? Effectively, we're looking at indirect taxes. When we want to tax an individual commodity, it's indirect. And what we mean by that is an indirect tax is a tax that's not collected directly proportional to income. And we have three different broad types of indirect taxes that have the ability to influence prices. One is an excise tax, which I've mentioned this term before, which is where we have a discriminatory tax on consumption. And what we mean by discrimination here is that it discriminates between products. So we choose which products to include it on. We can have it on cigarettes and not, for example, on a substitute of cigarettes. The importance of this is that we're able to clearly define which products this applies to. A tariff is a second type of indirect tax, but a tariff is only a tax that's applied to an imported product. So an imported cigarette would have a tariff, whereas a domestically produced cigarette wouldn't have a tariff. And so our concern with using tariffs as a health tax is that it's only really going to influence where something is produced rather than where something is consumed. And a sales tax, which is a VAT or a general sales tax, we also don't generally like to see this as a health tax because it's a non-discriminatory tax. It generally is going to be applied to all substitutes in consumption. And the result is that it doesn't change relative prices. So when we're talking about health taxes, we like to favor excise taxes. They're discriminatory. By that, I mean they target a very narrow or specific range of products. It's very easy to administer because we levy it relatively early in the supply chain and collect it from a very small number of firms. But importantly, it gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of design of tax. And that's something we're going to spend a bit of time talking about today. And importantly, it doesn't distinguish between domestic and imported production. And so it's really going to affect consumption rather than production. We do see the use of some of these other taxes like tariff and sale taxes in very exceptional circumstances, but they're not really going to be hugely relevant to many of the countries in Southeast Asia, given that they're all relatively large countries to some extent. So I want to talk a little bit about sugary drink taxes. I think this is something that's of interest when we want to talk about health taxes and nutrition. So rather than focusing on tobacco, which I think Abdullah will do a lot more, we've got to focus a little bit early on in the discussion on sugary sweetened beverages, and then look at a more sort of holistic example of a country. And I think people might be wondering why all of a sudden is there such a big interest in sugary sweetened beverage consumption and thus taxing sugary sweetened beverages. And I think one of the reasons for this is the trends in consumption. Indonesia aside, we do see significant declines occurring in tobacco consumption globally. And this is not occurring among sugary drink consumption. And what we're able to do in this really clever figure here is plot consumption of calories per day from sugary drinks in 2018 on the vertical axis and plot the same figure in 2009 on the horizontal axis. And what this shows us is that in countries above the line, we're seeing consumption is rising or has risen over this decade, the second decade in the 2000s. And if countries are below the 45-degree line, consumption is declining over time. And what you can clearly see is that the countries where we're seeing the declines in consumption are purple, which means they're high-income countries, whereas we're seeing the growth mainly in these countries that are middle-income countries. And I think this is incredibly important in Southeast Asia, where we've really got a concentration of middle-income countries, and you can see so many Southeast Asian countries here. Indonesia over here, Vietnam over here, Philippines over here, Thailand up here. So we definitely see a lot of countries above the line. One country I'm going to speak about a little bit later is Mexico. You can see it up there right at the top. And South Africa, my home country, ZAF over here. Again, rapid growth in that period. And again, this is calories sold per day. So we're taking the sales, we're estimating the calories from sales, and then per person per day. And a big question is, why is this happening? Why are sugary sweetened beverages, fruit juices, sugary sodas, energy drinks, etc.? Why is consumption of them growing as much as they are? And I think the answer for that is quite easy, that these products are becoming rapidly more affordable over time. This is a figure here from a paper that I did a few years ago with Alex Lieber and Michael Stuklos and Jeffrey Dropen and some colleagues at the American Cancer Society. And what we've looked at is looking at the trends in affordability of sugary drinks. And what we found is that sugary drinks are becoming rapidly more affordable over time in almost all countries in the world. And what we could see here is that this average annual change in affordability, simply the ratio of price and income, was always negative in these countries, which means it's becoming more affordable. And again, the rate of increase in affordability in a lot of these Southeast Asian countries is particularly rapid. And if we contrast that to cigarettes, where there's been a lot of attention to raising taxes and raising prices, we see very different pictures. Sorry, these figures are orientated differently. But what we see here is the trends in the affordability of cigarettes over a similar time period. And what we can clearly see is that certainly in high-income countries, which are in the blue, we see the majority of high-income countries are seeing cigarettes become less affordable over time. So taxes and prices in these countries are rising and reducing affordability over time. When we look at low and middle income countries here, up until 2018, if we look at a large period of 1990 to 2018, we experienced that cigarettes are still becoming more affordable in many low and middle income countries. But if we look over the last 10 years specifically, that figure changes dramatically. And we're starting to really see low middle income countries reduce the affordability of cigarettes quite dramatically in this period of time. And that's likely causing this big division as to why we're seeing cigarette consumption declining in many countries, particularly low middle income countries, and why we are seeing sugary drink prices or sugary drinks increase in usage over the last 10 years. I think that last picture really does show this. Also, why is affordability important? Why do we not just want to look at what the trends in prices have been? Why do we want taxes to influence affordability rather than prices? And the answer is around economic development and income growth. What we can see in this figure here is looking at income growth, per capita GDP growth, which is a sort of a fairly standardized measure of income growth in the world from 1960 to 2018. And what we can see is that for the most part, while low and middle income countries grew at a similar rate to high income countries up until the late 1990s, from the early 2000s, we've seen this clear divergence where we've seen low and middle income countries grow a lot more rapidly in the last 20 to 30 years. And we can see this here on the right-hand side. If we look at the economic growth rates in the 1980s, they were 3%, about just under 3% in the 1990s, and 5% in the 2000s. And this creates important opportunities. It allows economies to grow. It allows infrastructure to improve, education to improve, health functionally improves as well. But also it does increase the affordability of products that create significant risks to health in the longer term: smoking, drinking, and overnutrition. And so what we see during this time as well is this transition that occurs from under to overnutrition. The result of this is we've seen a lot more interest in sugary drink taxes over the last few years. As you can see here, this interest in implementing sugary drink taxes is now relatively global, and we've got countries all around the world implementing different types of sugary drink taxes. And I'm going to highlight on a specific examples of this, specifically starting with South Africa, and then looking at the UK, a little bit Mexico, and even jumping a little bit into Mongolia. So, if we want to look at the potential impact of these taxes, we can look at some global estimates to sort of help provide this. Here's some estimates from a paper that I've worked on with Amit Suman a few years ago, which tries to look at the impact of health tax increases on tobacco, alcohol, and SSBs over long periods of time. And what we can clearly see is that they have very differential impacts. If we're looking purely at raising revenue, globally, alcohol taxes is the low-hanging fruit. The reason being is alcohol is not particularly highly taxed in many countries, particularly many low middle income countries. But also the ability of it to raise revenue is quite significant because of market structures and the market size of the market fundamentally. From a health perspective, it also has an ability to avoid a lot of deaths. That said, I think sugary drinks is often seen here as being low impact because of a relatively lower revenue yield and relatively smaller amount of years of life gained or deaths averted. But nevertheless, it's very much a value for money initiative, given its ability, the amount of money it raises per years of life gained. So I want to jump ahead into some of these country examples. And really what I want to highlight is that not all taxes are made equally. How we structure and design taxes are critically important. We've got a lot of experience from tobacco. We've got a growing experience from alcohol. And this really does help ensure that the taxes result in what we want them to achieve. Firstly, I think what we know from tobacco is that uniform specific taxes are likely the best solution we can have. And I think Abdullah is going to talk about that specifically in Indonesia, and he'll show some of the challenges with the tiered systems that we have in Indonesia. We know that the tax base is also a big challenge. And I'm going to talk about an example quickly from Vietnam. An important difference between tobacco and alcohol taxes is that and this informs how we want to structure taxes, is that for the most part, tobacco products are mostly heterogeneous in terms of combustible cigarettes. They cover, call it 99% of the market in many countries, maybe with the exception of some South Asian countries, which have significant markets for smokeless tobacco or for BDs. And so we want to exploit that heterogeneity in the way we design a tax system. Alcohol, on the other hand, is very varied in terms of type, not just in terms of beer, wine, spirits, but in terms of the in terms of the alcohol content. And so this really looks at helping informing us of which experience is most relevant, for example, for sugary drinks. Do we want to tax sugary drinks in a similar way to we tax alcohol, or similar way to we tax cigarettes? Important is this dose relationship. What we know is that cigarettes with higher or lower nicotine strength, that's not what is causing the harm in the cigarette. A higher nicotine content in the cigarette is not causing more harm. It may make it more addictive, and thus that sort of comes into a complicating factor in the way people use it, but it's not what causes the harm. Whereas with alcohol and with sugary drinks, that dose, the alcohol, the sugar, has a far greater link to harm. And so we can help this understand us how we best design a tax system. So this is sort of just giving us a bit of a broad basis on the tax structures on tobacco and why we favor specific taxes and why we favor uniform specific taxes. But I'm going to leave that a little bit for Abdullah to talk probably about in a more practical sense in Indonesia. That said, I think one of the important reasons why we favor specific taxes, why we favor uniform specific taxes over ad valorem taxes, and why we favor them is because specific taxes tend to result in much higher prices. And we can see this as data from the WHO Global Tobacco Control Report, that specific taxes, countries which have only specific taxes have higher taxes than ad valorem, that countries that have mixed systems tend to have lower taxes than countries with specific taxes. And what we can also see is quite clearly how we've had a shift in tobacco from favoring ad valorem taxes towards specific taxes and mixed systems favoring specific taxes. So we've seen a global momentum shifting towards the use of specific taxes. This is a slide that I'm going to come back to, actually. Let's rather jump ahead. So I said earlier that we really do not favor ad valorem taxes. And here is a great example of why we don't want ad valorem taxes. We don't favor ad valorem taxes. By the way, what we mean by an ad valorem tax is a tax based on value, versus the specific tax is a tax based on the volume. So a specific tax would be, let's say, $1 per pack, versus an ad valorem tax, which is X% of a price. And here's a fantastic example of why we don't like percentage-based ad valorem taxes. Vietnam levies what we call an ad valorem tax on the ex-factory price. And what we've seen over the last few years, over the last sort of 15 years, is how, as Vietnam raised that excise tax rate, firstly from 55% to 65% and 65% to 70%, is we saw no noticeable increase in prices over time. So the increase in the tax rate over time didn't result in an increase in prices, and that was achieved because what we call undershifting, that the tax increase, the ex-factory price was lowered in order to absorb the tax increases. So we can clearly see that as from 2007 to 2008, as the tax rate increased, that blue bar, which is the tax base or the ex-factory price, declined. And then we can see that again from 2015 to 2016. And the reason why this is really a problem is that it results in no health impact. If prices don't rise as a result of the tax increase, smoking prevalence doesn't fall. We don't have people increasing quitting. We don't have reduced youth initiation, and we have no health impact. In fact, what we have is probably an increase in revenue without a small increase in revenue without any noticeable health impact. So again, these tax structures are important, and the way we design the tax is really important. So Vietnam effectively spent a significant amount of political capital raising tax rates with having very little to show for it in terms of health benefit, so to speak. Whereas what happens if with specific taxes, we clearly see increases in the taxes resulting in increases in prices and changing behavior. And we got to look at the example of South Africa, where we can look at that in a lot more detail. So in South Africa, let's have a quick look at the burden of disease. In 2000, it's quite a while ago, but I wanted to look at the burden of disease well before we started seeing some of these interventions really taking effect. And what we can quite clearly see is that as a contribution to death and contribution to DALYs, alcohol, tobacco, and high BMI are a big contributor. And so there's quite clearly a need for intervention here in terms of the third, fourth, fifth risk factor for deaths and DALYs. The use of tax has been used on all of these and with significant effect. Specifically, the SSB tax, or the sugary drink tax, is relatively newer. It's only been around in the last, call it 3 years now, but it was first spoken about in 2016. The initial proposal was to base this tax on the grams of sugar per 100 milliliters. So the tax was going to be applied based on how much sugar there is in a drink. This is what we could call a nutrient or dose tax. I like to call it a dose tax. Maybe it's not the right term, but it's really focusing on the sugar content of drinks. So what did it apply to? It only applied to drinks that included beverages with added sugar, and not with which not on drinks that had sugar in it naturally. This is similar to the tax structure that was used on beer in South Africa, and we're going to review that a little bit shortly. The rate itself was attempting to approximate a rate of 20% on a can of Coke, commonly consumed sugary drink. What we saw is significant industry opposition, and when I mean significant, it's an enormous amount of lobbying and public pressure from producers was applied to government. A year after the first announcement of it, after consideration, the tax itself was adjusted to 2.1 cents per gram of 100 milliliters for sugar content exceeding 4 grams per 100 milliliters. So what this did was actually change the structure to include a threshold. That meant that nothing with less than 4 grams of sugar per 100 milliliters was taxed. But it further extended the base a little bit to include intrinsic sugars, but this is a little misleading since it explicitly excluded 100% juices, and concentrates were included at half rate. We're going to come back to that in a second, but we'll quickly look at tobacco taxes in South Africa and alcohol taxes a little bit, and we can see why government went along the path of designing it the way they did. So on cigarettes in South Africa implements a uniform specific tax, which is an amount of rands, which is the South African currency, per pack of cigarettes. In the most recent year, currently the tax is about 12 rand per pack of 20 cigarettes. That's equivalent to a little bit less than $1 per pack. And then what we can see here is that the blue bar is, and the orange bar is the tax. The silver bar is the VAT, or the general sales tax, before it became VAT. I think it became VAT in the early 1990s. Before that, it was called general sales tax. And the total bar here is the retail price in inflation adjusted terms. So what we can clearly see here is that for many years, up until the early 1990s, cigarettes became cheaper. The prices of cigarettes were falling. And the reason why the price of cigarettes were falling was because this orange bar was getting smaller. So the specific tax per pack was declining over time. And that was effectively declining because inflation was high, and inflation was eroding the real value of that tax. And as we see excise taxes declining and prices declining, the red bar is cigarette sales were increasing. Quite clearly, as prices got cheaper over time, up until the 1991, consumption was increasing. It's quite remarkable then that the moment we see prices start increasing from 1991 onwards, we see sales and consumption declining quite consistently, and the turning points coinciding well. This is quite a remarkable figure, actually, in terms of how strong this relationship is between prices and consumption. And we've even seen some sort of specific artifacts that we've seen in here, where prices increased quite rapidly in the period from 2008 to 2010, with some significant declines in consumption there. So it coincides quite strongly. And so this makes the case really strongly that countries can use specific taxes quite effectively to raise prices and reduce consumption. And we've spoken about the importance of raising revenue, and here we clearly see the power of these taxes to raise revenue. The orange line is the revenue. I don't know why this doesn't come out in the legend. And we can quite clearly see that increases in revenues as they occurred quite dramatically, increasing from about 5 billion rand a year to a peak of about 17 billion rand a year in the early 2010s. What we saw is a sort of greater instability in revenue in the last few years, and that's mainly been a result of this, call it a collapse in the tax administration system, and not on excise taxes, but more broadly, there's been huge challenges in revenue collections. So beer taxes in South Africa have a different system, and I said this is one that can inform us in terms of how we design the SSB taxes. A tax like we have on tobacco, which would be, let's say, 15 rand per packet of cigarettes, on beer it would translate into something like 15 rand per liter of beer. But instead, what we mentioned earlier is that, unlike tobacco, the strength of the alcohol is a critical link to the harm. And what we do know is beer has different strengths. allows us to use the alcohol as the tax base. So I like to think of it then, instead of being a blunt instrument tax, we have a sharp knife where we can target the alcohol content. And that's what we do in South Africa. And so since 1998, the tax has been targeted on per liters of absolute alcohol. And it means that a can of beer, in South Africa, they sell beer in 330 milliliter cans. A can of a lighter alcohol beer called Windhoek Light, for example, which is 2.4% alcohol strength, would only be 62 cents, whereas a can of Black Label, a higher strength 2.5% beer, would have a tax of R1.44 per can. And what we can clearly see is that makes quite a big difference in terms of the tax. So what we like in terms of this type of system is that it's able to target alcohol content, and that changes the market. What we can see here is that since we moved to this alcohol content-based tax system in South Africa, we've seen a significant shift in the market from higher strength beer to lower strength beer. And that hasn't occurred because prices changed. It's occurred because producers shifted the market through advertising. As we raised the tax on the lighter alcohol beer, so the advertising spend shifted to the lighter alcohol beer. And we can clearly see, as the advertising shifted to the lighter alcohol beer, there's been a strong link to a decline in alcohol volume from per adult, with little change in the actual volume of beer being sold. So it clearly has created incentives to shift the market. And so, taking that into account, this is how then South Africa decided to design an SSB tax system to focus on the sugar content and to focus on the tax being based on the sugar content. I described earlier how there was an original announcement and then a subsequent revision on the system in South Africa. And this shows you the tax per product on these various systems. And what we can clearly see is that, for the most part, higher sugar content taxes under the system or products with higher sugar contents have higher taxes. So something with a 13.5 grams of sugar per 100 milliliters ends up having 3 Rand per liter tax, as opposed to a product with much lower sugar content having a lower tax. And so what we can clearly see here is it creates an incentive for producers to lower sugar content, or an incentive for producers to shift advertising, etc., to lower sugar product. And that creates a strong incentive for producers, and it also creates opportunities effectively to avoid the tax, i.e. a producer can get out from paying the tax by adjusting their products. A final note on revenue generation in South Africa and from excise taxes, and what we can clearly see is that these taxes do contribute quite differently to the revenue take. What we know is that alcohol taxes are a dramatic contributor to revenue, about 2.3% of all government revenue, much higher than tobacco. And what we can clearly see is that SSB taxes in South Africa, just like those projections from the Bloomberg Summers Task Force, is a pretty small revenue generator within the broader scheme. What we could also see is quite clearly that there are other mechanisms that South Africa uses for excise taxes that are much bigger revenue pools, including particularly liquid fuels as well. So what has been some of the impact of these taxes, specifically the sugary drink taxes in South Africa? It's a relatively new tax, and so it gives us an opportunity to look at evaluating the impact of this quite directly. And we've started to get a growing body of evidence of this. Nick Stacey has been one of the primary authors in terms of doing this evaluation. And some of the work that he's done is really, some of it's been quite predictable in terms of the results that it's seen, and some of it's been a little bit more nuanced and interesting. We've certainly seen increases in prices as a result of the tax, which is maybe, I didn't anticipate quite as much increase in prices, but we saw prices of carbonates, particularly the sodas, increase after the implementation of the tax, whereas prices of the untaxed beverages did not. We also saw that the price increases were not greater for higher sugar beverages, which is maybe a little bit surprising given the first finding. That said, we did see that the reductions in those price increases did lead to some reductions in consumption. That was contemporaneous with the HPL. That's what they call the tax in South Africa. It's called the HPL. But that we have seen that the mean sugar consumption from taxable beverages fell quite a bit in light of the implementation of the tax. That's quite significant. And what we can see is that these trends have been quite consistent and increased over time. The UK, on the other hand, has a very different approach to sugary drink taxes. Their design is also quite similar to South Africa in focusing on sugar content, but they focus quite extensively on using tiers. And the tiers here are interesting. And the reason why the tiers here are interesting is they very much draw a line in the sand and create a very strong incentive for firms to get the sugar content under 8 grams per 100 milliliters. And this can be incredibly powerful because it's going to shift a much bigger proportion of the market than some other taxes would. That said, tiers can work here really well if they're cleverly designed. And I'm going to show you an example of where a tier can be used and is not necessarily cleverly designed. But here we quite clearly see, this is a picture from a paper that got published last year on the impact on use and prices. And what we can clearly see is significant reductions in the use of product that was taxed, the red as opposed to the blue. I mentioned about using tiers being problematic. In Mongolia, a country where a large amount of alcohol is consumed, they put the tier, for example, on vodka at 40%. And for those of you who might drink vodka or know of vodka, is that this is a common alcohol content for most vodkas. And if you put that tier at exactly 40%, it means that everyone's simply going to manipulate the product to come in at 39% and have a lower tax rate. So when we design tiers, we've got to design tiers very, very carefully to ensure that they're bringing about the impact that we desire. Another country where a very different SSB tax was used is Mexico, which implemented a flat tax. So instead of using this sugar or alcohol-based type of content system, it purely did a tobacco-style tax where the tax was implemented X pesos per liter. In this case, it was to approximate 10%, 1 peso per liter. And what we did see, though, is that we've seen a significant decline in the sales of taxed beverages and a significant increase in untaxed beverages, particularly water. So clearly a shift in the market there. What do we see in opposition, in terms of the messages of opposition? And yeah, we'll focus a little bit on SSBs here because I think that's what I've been speaking about. But a few things in terms of the messages that we get from opponents of them. One, they want to tell us that the taxes won't work. And what they're meaning in terms of that the taxes won't work is that a reduction in sugary beverage consumption, they're arguing, is not actually going to reduce obesity. And there's an interesting sort of mechanism through which they're making that argument. They're not making that argument saying that a reduction or an increase in the tax won't reduce consumption. They're making an argument that reduction in consumption of calories from sugary drinks aren't going to reduce or improve health through reduced obesity, etc. And it's a bit of a tricky argument that they're making because they're making that argument on a basis of assumptions. They're arguing that people will replace those calories elsewhere, the evidence for that is weak to mixed. But they're also arguing effectively that people won't change initiation behavior, and that's a problematic argument because we certainly know that it will. They're also going to argue that taxes are regressive and that they're going to hurt the poor. And what we now know is that there's which I'm going to look at in a little bit of detail, there's a growing body of evidence that suggests that in actual fact, taxes are progressive, that they have strong, important distributional equity outcomes. And thirdly, that tax is bad for business. It's going to destroy jobs, etc. What I want to focus on is just this one specific argument, because I think it's the one that's least understood and probably one where we've got a growing and important body of evidence. What they're arguing is that excise taxes are on average regressive. But that's not the important part of the tax. In actual fact, we've got to look at the tax at the margin. And we know that at the margin, these taxes are not regressive, they're progressive. And the reason why they're progressive at the margin is a few things. One, they induce behavior change. And that's not taken into account. It saves health costs as well. And what we can clearly see is that once we take into account this extended cost benefit, this extended cost effectiveness of the reduced health expenditures, the reduced use of the products, and take that behaviorally into account, what we clearly see is that there's an important positive distributional impact as a result of these taxes, both in terms of cost savings, in terms of health benefits as well. And we're starting to see a massive literature develop using some of these methodologies that have looked at not just SSBs, but tobacco as well. And we're starting to see a real support for this idea that there's a positive distributional impact. Some challenges to consider with going back to this big question of design is that the design of tax is very, very powerful. The way we decide to implement the taxes is going to have big consequences for the effectiveness of the taxes. We do need to take into account the capacity to implement and administer these. Some countries don't have the capacity necessarily to design and implement more complicated tax systems. It creates needs for understanding, for example, what the sugar content is, what the alcohol content is. That might require a lot more regulatory work in terms of labeling, in terms of standard setting, in terms of auditing. So it does create a big need on that side. Alternatively, if we want to use thresholds like the UK does, we really need to have the agility to monitor these and make changes rapidly to change the sort of those thresholds, rapidly responding to the market. What we do know as well with sugary drinks, and to a lesser extent alcohol, but it's also important, is that the markets are complex. There are a lot of products on the market. We need to decide what we want to tax, how we want to tax it, in order to design that tax, and to understand the elasticities and the way that consumers substitute between categories and between taxed and non-taxed products to be able to best define it. We need to really, in order to develop the policy, we need to know a lot about the industry structure and the products on the market. We also need to know, particularly from the Ministry of Finance and the Revenue Authority, what data they're collecting, and be able to build a good model of the market and a good model in terms of revenue and health outcomes. Before I wrap up, I want to just sort of highlight how I think the importance of these issues in the Southeast Asian region. There are a lot of countries in the region that have been champions on some of these tax areas. For example, the Philippines has been a real champion on tobacco, alcohol, and sugary drink taxes over the recent time. We've had some success in Thailand, but there are important developments that are going on in many countries in the region. Vietnam, for example, Indonesia, for example, where there's a lot of work going on these taxes. My one sort of wish is that we pay a lot more attention to the way we design these taxes. And I think Indonesia is a good example of some significant improvements we've been able to make on the design of the tax over the last few years. And I'm sure that Abdullah is going to take us through the experience in Indonesia and just how the design and the implementation of the tax has changed over a number of years, and how that's really brought about significant changes and benefits to the market. And within that, sort of make a little bit of a plea that in the policy work that we do in the countries in the Southeast Asia region, that we maintain the focus on the tax structure issues, on the tax design issues going forward, because I think that's the one area where we can make a lot of progress in relatively short periods of time. I think my favorite thing in Indonesia over the years is when we're looking at some policy designs, and the big question is, do we raise the tax? And sometimes the answer is that's actually not necessarily the best outcome. And I laugh at that because it sounds counterintuitive, but the way in the designing of that tax and what tax we increase and how we increase that tax is actually probably is going to have a bigger benefit and more important than purely just saying, let's raise taxes. But once again, thank you very much for the invitation to be here, and I hope this has been useful. And I want to say I miss all my friends in Jakarta a lot with everyone on the call today, and I'm sorry that I'm unable to be Indonesia with you guys at the moment.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation, Ivan. It is a very comprehensive explanation which shows the depth and extensive experience in the implementation of health taxes in different parts of the world. Before we continue with our second speaker, I was requested by the committee to sort of summarize the presentation by Evan in Indonesian language. So I hope it will, I could explain it as good as Evan, but I'm not so sure, but I will try my best. So, the moment, Evan Bletcher sesuai dengan topik yang disampaikannya mengenai penggunaan excise taxes dalam mendukung penerapan nutrisi dalam kesehatan masyarakat, dan juga sudah menyampaikan pengalamannya dalam mengembangkan dan juga menerapkan berbagai rancangan pajak kesehatan di berbagai negara di dunia. Evan menjelaskan banyak hal ya, berbagai terminologi, berbagai pengertian yang terkait dengan pajak kesehatan, yaitu merupakan pajak yang dikenakan terhadap berbagai produk yang memiliki dampak negatif terhadap kesehatan masyarakat. Yang sering kita tahu ini adalah tembakau, kemudian juga alkohol, dan juga sekarang ini yang kita juga banyak dengar adalah minuman berpemanis atau sugar sweetened beverage, dan juga bahkan diterapkan kepada sumber energi yang berasal dari fosil, ya seperti minyak. Diharapkan dengan menerapkan pajak ini di dampak kesehatan masyarakatnya itu bisa dikurangin dan kita bisa meningkatkan kesehatan masyarakat. Selain itu juga bisa menambah penghasilan bagi negara yang menerapkannya dalam mengatasi berbagai dampak kesehatan yang ditimbulkan oleh berbagai zat tersebut. Ya, dan ada berbagai tipe pajak ya yang tadi juga sudah disampaikan yang biasa dikenakan, yaitu ada excise tax ya, kemudian juga ada tarif dan ada pajak penjualan. Tapi yang terkait dengan pajak terhadap konsumsi berbagai barang yang terkait dengan kesehatan ini, yang dipilih biasanya adalah yang disebut sebagai excise tax. Ya, tadi juga diceritakan mengenai sejarahnya yang bahwa pertama kali dikenakan pada tembakau untuk mengatasi epidemi tembakau, dan kemudian diperkenalkan juga untuk dikenakan pada alkohol dan minuman berpemanis. Ya, kenapa minuman berpemanis ini menjadi target? Karena saat ini kita melihat konsumsinya yang semakin tinggi dan efek kesehatan yang ditimbulkannya sangat besar, seperti berbagai penyakit tidak menular, diabetes, penyakit jantung, dan sebagainya, sehingga diharapkan dengan penerapan pajak ini dapat mengurangi beban akibat penyakit tersebut. Saat ini sudah ada 50 jurisdiksi di seluruh dunia yang menerapkan pajak terhadap minuman berpemanis. Dan juga Evan menceritakan pengalaman dalam pengembangan dan penerapan pajak kesehatan di berbagai negara berpenghasilan menengah dan rendah seperti di Vietnam, Afrika Selatan, dan Meksiko, dan membandingkannya tadi juga dengan penerapannya di UK, di Inggris, serta dampak penerapan pajak ini dalam menurunkan konsumsi tembakau, alkohol, maupun minuman berpemanis, dan manfaat yang diperoleh dalam kesehatan masyarakat. Selain itu juga bahwa ternyata pengenaan pajak dapat mendorong industri mengubah formula produk yang dihasilkan sehingga mengandung kadar zat yang berbahaya, misalnya alkohol dan gula ini menjadi lebih rendah. Juga dibandingkan berbagai strategi yang dipilih oleh masing-masing negara yang mempengaruhi keberhasilan dalam mencapai efek yang diharapkan. Terakhir, Evan juga menceritakan berbagai argumen yang menentang penerapan pajak kesehatan dan juga tantangan dan berbagai hal yang harus dipikirkan dalam penerapan pajak kesehatan. Demikian summary yang saya sampaikan dari pembicara pertama. Now I will continue with our second speaker. First, I would like to introduce him, but I believe he wouldn't need any introduction for us. Yeah, is Dr. Abdillah Hasan. He is currently works as a lecturer at the Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Indonesia, also as a researcher at the Pusat Ekonomi dan Bisnis Syariah or Center for Syariah Economic and Business of the Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Indonesia. Since 2020, he also holds position as Director of Human Resources of Universitas Indonesia. So he also my boss actually. Yeah, he holds a doctoral degree in Political Science from Universitas Indonesia and master degree in Economic Science also from Universitas Indonesia. Abdillah does research in tobacco control economics and politics in Indonesia and has published numerous publications on the topics in various reputable journals. So I think we don't need to lengthen this introduction. I will give the time to Pak Abdillah. Pak Abdillah, please, the time is yours.
Thank you, Ibu Indah. Okay, I will share my PowerPoint. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everybody. And very good morning to my colleague, my brother Ivan. I'm happy to see you here, and I hope things going well in Australia. Yeah. Okay, in this meeting, in this session, I will explain as requested about the tobacco excise policy in Indonesia and the health financing. Yeah, the health financing. So. In the first part of my presentation, mostly on the tobacco excise, and then later in the later part, I will explain about the mechanism on how tobacco excise revenue can be used for health financing. And I will start with the quality and healthy economic growth. Yeah. For economists, yeah, we know the term of economic growth, and we love the term of economic growth. Yeah. However, we need to make sure that the economic growth has good quality and it also healthy economic growth. So I will begin a statement about the healthy society is more productive than the sickly, and I'll be honest that this is the translation from my PowerPoint in Bahasa. Yeah, so healthy society is more productive than the sickly. Healthy society, I think we agree that does not increase the medical cost. Healthy society is happier than the sickly. And healthy society is the foundation of the quality of resilient human resources. So it is important to have a healthy economic growth. And in terms of quality economic growth, usually economic growth has a quality when it can decrease poverty, when it can decrease unemployment, when it can decrease inequality, yeah, and then when it can increase access for education and regarding the health, yeah, when it can increase the quality of the health of the nation. And economic growth must be supported by healthy society, and the economic growth must produce a healthy society. So Indonesia's economy should not be left to the cigarette industry or other industry that damage health. Yeah, that damage health. Public health should not be a sacrifice. Yeah, public health should not be sacrificed for the sake of state revenue and for the growth of the cigarette industry. Yeah, so we can increase the state revenue, the government revenue from tobacco excise, but not from the increase of quantity sales, quantity sold, yeah, but from the increase in the price and the excise rate, excise tariff, yeah, and yeah, and we cannot, we could not, we should not, we must not sacrifice the public health for the growth of the cigarette industry. I think it is unethical it is unethical to sacrifice the public health for the sake of the cigarette industry. And please remember and care for the health of ourselves, our family, and our community. So do not pity on the cigarette industry, yeah, because as Ivan realized that Indonesian people, although they are not smoker, although they do not work in the cigarette industry, but when the government increased the excise tariff, they are very yeah, they're complaining about how about the welfare of the industry, the welfare of the workers, the welfare of the farmers. Yeah, they do not realize the benefit, yeah, the benefit of increasing the excise to the public health. Yeah, so we have to make sure this. Yeah, we have to change this, that all of the policy is to increase the public health, and public health is more important than the industry. Yeah. Okay, so this is the framework of increasing the excise rate tariff. Yeah. So in Indonesia, cigarette has 4 tax. Yeah. First is the VAT. Second is excise. 3 tax on tobacco. Yeah, 3 tax on tobacco. First is the excise, and the second is VAT. The third is local cigarette tax. Yeah, and mostly we are talking about the excise one. Because the VAT is a uniform rate. Yeah. Although for cigarette, there's a different calculation for the VAT. Yeah. And then for the local cigarette tax, I will explain in the later. We have a uniform rate of 10% from the excise rate. So this is the framework here. When the government increase the cigarette excise, and then the price will increase, and then cigarette become less affordable, and then we hope that cigarette consumption is decreasing. Yeah, and when the cigarette consumption is decreasing, then health quality will increase, because smoking is the main risk factor of the non-communicable disease. And cigarette has inelastic demand because it is an addiction. Yeah. When we increase the price, when the government increase the price, then the quantity decrease is not that much. Yeah, it's less than the increase in price. Yeah, and so it will produce increasing state revenue to some extent. Yeah, and most condition, when the government increase the cigarette excise, then the state revenue, the government revenue will also increase. So it is good for public health. Increasing tobacco excise is good for the public health, and so it is good for the government revenue. This is the condition of smoking prevalence in Indonesia. Yeah. In Indonesia, from 2007 until 2018, in the last 11 years, prevalence of tobacco consumption remains 34%. Yeah, remains 34%. It is very high. Yeah, it is very high. and it is remained the same in the last 11 years. Our neighboring countries in ASEAN, they are decreasing, yeah, the rate decreasing, and 2 in 3 adult males smoke. Yeah. So yeah, the adult smoker is higher, yeah, it more than the non-adult smoker, yeah. And in most of FCTC ratifying countries, yeah, we also know there is a framework convention on tobacco control. Indonesia is the only country in Asia Pacific that has not ratified the FCTC. Yeah, in the most of FCTC ratifying country, the smoking prevalence has decreased. Yeah, so it is the good impact of FCTC is decreasing smoking prevalence. Yeah. But in Indonesia, it is remain the same, yeah, remain the same. And this is smoking prevalence for age 10 until 18 from 2013 until 2018. In Indonesia, we call it RPJMN, the middle development plan, yeah, middle development plan from 2014 until 2019, yeah, in the target of this the development plan, that the smoking prevalence among population age 10 until 18 is decreased, yeah, decreased from 7% to 5% in 2019, 7% in 2013, and the target is to decrease it to 5% in 2019. However, yeah, the fact, yeah, showing the reverse situation, yeah, where prevalence of smoking for 10 until 18 years old, instead of decreasing, it is increasing away from the target. So we need a hard work across sector, across stakeholder, yeah, across stakeholder to decrease the prevalence of smoking for the 10 until 18 years old. And the recent development, the recent update that the new target for this prevalence is 8.4% in 8.7, I think. Yeah, sorry, for the new RPJMN, yeah, 8.7 in the next 5 years, yeah, in the next 5 years. And we have this is the history of increasing tobacco excise and the relation to cigarette production. Yeah, maybe you hear often about that increasing tobacco tax is single most effective measure to decrease cigarette consumption. Yes, it is an effective measure. Yeah, in 2019, yeah, as you know, in 2019 we have election years, and at that time the government decided not to increase cigarette excise in all type. Yeah, for all type, it means that the price of cigarette will remain the same. Yeah, and the situation, yeah, in 2019 there is no increase in cigarette excise, and the result is cigarette production jump, yeah, increased very high, 7.3%. Yeah, this is 7.3%. Before, the government always increased the cigarette excise, and slowly the cigarette production decreasing. But when they did not increase in 2019, the production of cigarette jumped by 7.3%. And yeah, this is the more better picture. This is the better picture. As you know, this is cigarette sales, domestic sales from 2013 until 2020. Yeah. As you see, when there is no excise increase in 2019, the production jumped by 7% from 332 billion to 356. Yeah, and then in 2020, the government did increase very high. Yeah, I think at that time the excise rate, they increased it by 23%, and also they increased the sales price, yeah, the base price, yeah, by 35%. And as a result, yeah, the production of cigarette decreased by 332 decreased to be 332 billion, and this is billion stick per year. This is, yeah. So the point is increasing tobacco excise is effective to decrease cigarette production or cigarette consumption. So when the government did not increase the excise, then the result, as you see here, is a jump in cigarette production. Yeah, and then this is the affordability index. This is the government version. Yeah, the government version. So we see here that this is the price of cigarette. Yeah, the price of cigarette is increasing. Yeah, and this is the affordability index. Yeah. So when there is no increase in excise in 2019, the affordability index is decreasing or more affordable. Yeah, more affordable. And then when they increase in 2020, okay, they are becoming less affordable again. Yeah. And so less affordable here, decreasing consumption and production in this part. Okay. And this is the tobacco excise policy reformation. I take it from the government slide. Yeah. There are 5 topics in the excise reformation in Indonesia. First is regarding the excise system. Yeah, this is the excise system. So there are 3 excise system. First is ad valorem. Ad valorem is percentage to price. Yeah, percentage to price. And then the second is hybrid. Yeah, hybrid is the combination of ad valorem and specific. So yeah, at some base level they have a percentage to price, but we also have a specific. Specific is the specific system is rupiah, or the money. Yeah, the dollar per stick. Yeah, the dollar per stick. Yeah. This is specific. So from 2019 until now, we implement the specific excise system. And then the second topic is about the excise structure. Yeah. Tobacco excise structure in Indonesia is very complicated. Yeah, very complicated. We have layer. Yeah, we have from 19 layers in 2009 to be 10 layers in 2020. Yeah. And it is still the most complicated excise structure in the world. Yeah. Usually for other countries, they implement single rate. Yeah, a single specific rate, no matter what. Yeah, no matter what the type of cigarette and the production process. Yeah. And then the third topic is regarding the tariff. Yeah. So the government consistently increase, yeah, mostly they increase the tariff of cigarette excise every years. Yeah, every years. But from my analysis, and we in the election years, usually the government did not increase the excise, the tobacco excise, in 2009 and in 2014, 2019. Yeah, so the government did not increase the tobacco excise in the election years. So this is the pattern. Yeah, and we want the government to increase the tariff of excise above the inflation rate plus the economic growth, so that it will decrease the affordability and also decrease the consumption. And the fourth topic is regarding the price of cigarette, the base price. Yeah. There are 2 price. Yeah. Here is the HGE, the harga jual eceran, or a retail price, a regulated retail price, and with the transaction price. So the government has a regulation that the transaction price, the price that actually paid by the consumer, is at the minimum 85% from the regulated retail price. Yeah, regulated retail price. So we analyze, we complain to them that this policy has no scientific argument. Yeah, the regulated price and the transaction price should be the same. Yeah, should be the same. Yeah, and the fifth topic is regarding the law enforcement on illicit cigarette. Yeah, so the government did good in the illicit cigarette law enforcement. They intensify the law enforcement, yeah, so that the illicit cigarette decreasing from 7% in 2018 to 3% in 2019. Yeah, however, it increased again 4.8% in 2021. So, but compared with other countries, this percentage of illicit cigarette or illegal cigarette is relatively low, yeah, compared with other countries. And this is okay. This is the simplification of tobacco excise structure. As I mentioned before, from 19 tier or 19 layer to 10 layers. Yeah, 10 layers. So in Indonesia, we have three type of main cigarette. First is the SKT, cigarette kretek tangan, or hand rolled kretek cigarette. The second is white cigarette or machine white cigarette, SPM. Yeah. And then the third is kretek machine cigarette, And then the excise tariff decided based on the type of cigarette and also on the type of production, yeah, whether it is made by machine or it is made by hand rolled. Yeah. And yeah, as a in a sense, the hand rolled cigarette is has a cheaper tax than the machine one, and also the white. The white is, as you in the international type of cigarette like Marlboro, the tobacco only cigarette, they pay higher. Yeah, they pay higher. The reason is that because the hand roll is more labor intensive, and then the white cigarette has more import content. Although we can argue about it, yeah, but this is the situation right now. Yeah. So from 2018 until 2021 until now, from the last 3 years, yeah, there is no simplification of simplification of the structure. Yeah. And as the result of this situation, there's a widespread of price, yeah, from the cheapest one to the expensive one. Yeah, I think the cheapest one now we have a 5,000 rupiah per pack. Yeah, 5,000 is around $50, less than $50 per pack. Yeah, one pack is 12 stick. Yeah, and 12 stick. And in Indonesia, it is common to sell by stick, yeah, and it's very cheap. Yeah, it is very cheap, and it is affordable for the poor, affordable for children. Yeah, so the cheapest one is around 5,000 rupiah or $50, less than $50 per pack, and while the most expensive one is I think $2, yeah, $2 per pack. So it is very wide ranges. So that it creates the substitution effect, so that the smoker can substitute their consumption from the expensive one to the cheapest one, to the cheaper one. So yeah, it is hinder the effectiveness of tobacco excise increase to decreasing consumption. So we need to do about this to shorten the gap, yeah, between the cheapest and the most expensive one. And in 2021, the government has increased the tobacco excise, and this is the point, the key points. First, tax rate rise by weighted average by 12.5%, and honestly, I'm happy with this. Yeah, I'm happy with this because, as you know, in this the COVID era, the economic growth is negative, yeah, and also the inflation is not so that high, yeah. So number of 12.5% is quite high. And then hand rolled kretek excise do not rise, yeah, do not rise. And then for consumption control, tariff increase are more dominant to SKM, the machine kretek cigarette. It has 71% of market share, yeah. And then for product with low local content, yeah. So for the machine cigarette, they increase more than for the hand rolled cigarette. And I think it is reasonable, yeah, because the kretek machine they has 71% of market share. So if you want to decrease the consumption, you should target it the highest market share, which is the SKM, the kretek machine. And cigarette production, they project to fall about 2.2% until 3.3%. And then affordability index will increase. It means that less affordable from 12 to 13. And then the prevalence of smoking, it's 10 until 18, will drop to be 8.8 or 8.9%. For SKM and SPM, kretek machine and white machine, they have a higher, with for the SKM there are three more layer inside the SKM. Yeah, the one is the group one. Group one, they produce 3 billion stick a year, and they pay more than the lower one. Yeah, and so the government is increasing more, yeah, lot higher or increase more to the bottom layer. It means the SKM group 2, yeah, group 2B, yeah, group 2B, they increase more, so that it is a simplification signal, or a signal that the price cap inside the SKM, inside that kind of the type of cigarette is shortened. Okay, and yeah, as you know, the hand rolled kretek, they did not increase the excise tariff in 2021 for hand rolled kretek for the reason of labor. Yeah, and yeah, as an economist, we can expect, yeah, the consumption of hand rolled kretek will increase. Yeah, and the current situation, the updated situation, several tobacco producer, they are moving from machine to hand rolled, and also they are decreasing or lowering the group, yeah, from the 2A to 2B, yeah, to get the excise benefit, yeah, to get the excise incentive. Yeah, as you know, this kind of complicated policy is to accommodate, yeah, is to accommodate all the aspiration, yeah, from the public health, from the labor, and then from the local content, yeah. But this complicated structure also provide some gaps, provide loophole for the producer to tax avoidance, yeah, to do the tax avoidance, legal tax avoidance, yeah, legal tax avoidance by shifting to the hand roll, shifting to the type of cigarette that pay lower tax, yeah, which is the hand roll, and also the lower production, yeah, and it is happening now, That's why in terms of the competition, and also in terms of decreasing consumption, we need to simplify this structure, yeah. So yeah, we can expect that in next year, yeah, this is 0%, the increasing tariff is 0% for SKT, and then we can expect that their market share will increase. Yeah, their market share and increase. And although we do know that the increasing production of hand rolled kretek is not as fastest, yeah, it's not as fastest as the machine, yeah, but their price is very low, yeah, their price is very low, so that the children can access it, yeah. So we need to increase the price for hand rolled kretek also, yeah, for hand rolled kretek also. And highest increase is for the white machine. White machine group one. Group one means that they produce 3 billion stick a year, but they only have 2% of the market. SKT was not raised during the pandemic, but should not be accompanied by effort to help the farmers and workers to get better job outside the cigarette sector. And yeah, it is happening now that naturally some farmers, they did diversify, they did change the crop, yeah, from tobacco to other crops. Yeah. So yeah, this is me with Pak Istanto, Mr. Istanto in Magelang. Yeah, in Magelang they did a diversification from tobacco to yams, yeah, ubi, yeah, to yams. At that time, I visited with my colleague from the Bappenas. Bappenas is the development plan board in Indonesia, and this is a natural process. Yeah, the farmers will diversify when the tobacco less profitable. Yeah, less profitable, and it is very reasonable. And this is me in Pamekasan in East Java. And the farmers switch from tobacco to onion and corn. This is me with Pak Fadel in Pamekasan. It is before the pandemic in 2019, yeah, maybe in October or November something. And yeah, we also provide some several solutions for tobacco farmers and workers. Yeah, that maybe, yeah, they are because of decreasing cigarette consumption, then the demand for tobacco farmers, the demand for cigarette workers is also decreasing. So yeah, this is the framework. Yeah, the mandate of the constitution is that cigarette consumption is lowered. All ministry and institutions shall support the mandate of this constitution. The ministries should find solution and assist farmer to get a better livelihood. The Ministry of Finance should find a solution, and this is the Ministry of Agriculture. This is the Ministry of Finance should find a solution to open job for cigarette workers who are laid off. Yeah, the Ministry of Industry find a solution to encourage other industry that do not damage the health. The Ministry of, I think this is labor, yeah, and this is a finance must find solution as not to be addicted to the receipt of cigarette excise. Yeah, and we propose additional excise good. Yeah, because in Indonesia we only have three goods, excise goods, which is cigarette, tobacco product, alcohol, and alcoholic beverage. Yeah, so we need a mechanism for tobacco excise revenue sharing, and local cigarette tax can be used to help tobacco farmers and workers in the industry. So increasing cigarette price and cigarette excise is 4 wins. First, it is a public health win. It is a central government revenue win. Local government also win because they have more revenue. Yeah, because there is a local cigarette tax that is attached to the excise tariff. So when the excise tariff is increasing, then the local cigarette tax also increasing, and also the JKN or UHC, Universal Health Coverage, or BPJS Kesehatan wins because they get more money. Yeah, smoker reduce, healthy society, JKN burden reduce. And so next part is about the tobacco tax revenue for public health financing, including the universal health coverage. Okay, so there are two mechanisms. Sorry, There are two mechanisms of this of tobacco tax revenue for public health financing. The first one, we call it, we love what we call it, abbreviation. Yeah, we love shorten. Yeah, the word is TBHCHT, TBHCHT, yeah, or the 2% tobacco excise revenue sharing, yeah, tobacco excise revenue sharing. And the PRD or pajak rokok daerah or local cigarette tax, the 10% local cigarette tax. We already has this, yeah. And this is the sense of the policy, the sense of the policy. And I make it very brief in this one slide. Yeah, the 2% tobacco excise revenue sharing. Yeah, the 2% tobacco excise revenue sharing for health is based on the law number 39 2007 on excise. It is started in 2008. 2% of tobacco excise revenue shared to local tobacco and cigarette producing province and their cities government. It is central government revenue shared to the local government. Yeah? It is central government revenue shared to local government. There are 5 areas of spending. First is improving quality of tobacco leaf. Second is monitoring tobacco industry. Third, society welfare, including health. The fourth is socialization of excise policy. And the last is enforcement of illicit cigarette. Based on the latest regulation, Ministry of Finance regulation number 206 in 2020, Article 10, ya, pasal 10, Article 10, there are 3 main uses related to health, which is stunting and COVID-19 related activities, health infrastructure provision, and payment of universal health coverage. And the second mechanism is the local cigarette tax, the 10% for health. This is based on the law number 28, 2009 on local tax and retribution. It is started in 2014, so 5 years after the law issued. Yeah? Local cigarette tax is a provincial tax. This is province government revenue. This is revenue, local government revenue. Yeah? The rate is uniform, 10% of excise tariff. It is earmarked 50% for public health service and law enforcement. The law enforcement in here is regarding illicit cigarette again and smoke-free area. The Ministry of Health has 2 regulations regarding the local cigarette tax for health. The first one is Permenkes, the MOH regulation number 40, 2016. And the MOH regulation number 53, 2017. Yeah, this is the technical guidance for the public health service spending. Of the public health service allocation, 75% is dedicated for the UHC untuk CKN, and the other 25% is used based on Permenkes 40, 2016. Mechanism of the 75% for the UHC is regulated in the MOF, the Permenq, Ministry of Finance regulation number 128, 2018. Yeah, there are several if clause condition in the MOF regulation in this one. Yeah, so it is not simple one. It is not a simple policy. Yeah, and then 2% of tobacco excise revenue is shared to okay. Oh, this is the slide. Okay, and this is the number. Yeah. So if you ask me how much is the local cigarette tax for BPJS Kesehatan for the UHC, this is the number. So the number is decreasing. Yeah, the number is decreasing. And in 2018 is almost 2 trillion, and then decreasing 1 to be 1.2 trillion in 2019. In 2020, only 855 billion. Yeah, as you know, the deficit of the UHC at that time before the increase of the premium, yeah, it's around 15 trillion. Yeah, it's around 30 or 15 trillion. So this number 1 trillion and this is less than 1 trillion, I think is not enough. Yeah, it's not enough. And then, as you know, the government decided to increase the premium of the UHC, of the premi BPJS Kesehatan. So the situation where the research question now is this UHC deficit or not? Yeah, because there are different news. Yeah, in this news, it is stated that in 2020 BPJS Kesehatan recorded cash flow surplus 18.7 trillion. Yeah. In previous year, BPJS Kesehatan has a financial deficit. So based on this news, it is surplus. Yes, surplus. Yeah. And then based on the more updated news, yeah, based on the new BPJS Kesehatan Presiden Director, yeah, they are still in the deficit situation. But the deficit is relatively small compared to the 15 one. It's only 6.36 trillion. Yeah. So the question is, if the BPJS Kesehatan financial condition is okay, then we should divert. Yeah, we should divert the use of local cigarette tax fund for other health purposes, like health promotion and prevention. So the spirit of the Permenkes of the MOH regulation number 14 2016 is that this fund will be used for health promotion and prevention. And then in the next year, 2017, there is a deficit of JKN. And then the government decided to use this fund for the UHC. Yeah, but initially, this fund is initially for the health promotion and prevention, and I strongly propose that we should use this fund for the health promotion and prevention. So that's all for now. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Back to you, Ibu Indah.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Abdillah, for a very extensive explanation of the condition of the tobacco excise in Indonesia. And as the previous session, I must give some summary in Indonesian language. So Pak Abdillah sudah menyampaikan topiknya mengenai penerapan kebijakan cukai tembakau dan hubungannya dengan pembiayaan kesehatan, dan beliau menekankan betapa pentingnya pertumbuhan ekonomi yang tidak hanya menekankan sehat, tapi juga harus berkualitas. Ya, karena masyarakat yang sehat adalah fondasi dari sumber daya manusia yang resilient dan berkualitas. Dan menurut beliau bahwa kesehatan masyarakat tidak boleh dikorbankan demi memperoleh pendapatan dari negara, apalagi untuk kepentingan industri tembakau. Ya. Dan menurut beliau penerapan cukai tembakau itu sangat efektif dalam menurunkan konsumsi tembakau dan sekaligus juga meningkatkan pendapatan negara. Saat ini Indonesia mengalami kondisi epidemi tembakau di mana 2 dari 3 laki-laki dewasa merokok, ya, dan padahal menurut RPJMN 2019 waktu itu sudah ditetapkan target penurunan konsumsi tembakau hingga 5,4%, namun kenyataannya prevalensi masyarakat yang merokok terus meningkat, ya, sesuai dari hasil Riskesdas yang terakhir saat ini ada 9% prevalensi perokok di Indonesia. Jadi tidak menurun, ya, tapi meningkat. Oleh karena itu penerapan cukai tembakau dan menaikkan, ya, cukai tembakau yang tentu saja akan menaikkan harga rokok merupakan instrumen yang paling efektif untuk bisa menurunkan konsumsi rokok, ya, atau konsumsi tembakau. Dan pemerintah Indonesia telah melakukan reformasi pada kebijakan cukai tembakau yang akhirnya saat ini kita memiliki struktur cukai tembakau yang lebih sederhana, walaupun tadi saya melihat juga masih cukup kompleks ya. Dan ada beberapa kunci ya penerapan kebijakan tembakau ini di 2021. Tadi beberapa slide-nya disampaikan dalam bahasa Indonesia sehingga tentu saya tidak perlu untuk menerjemahkannya. Tapi dari situ beberapa hal penting yaitu bahwa kebijakan akan meningkatkan tax atau cukai sebesar 12,5% dan diharapkan bisa menurunkan prevalensi masyarakat berusia 10-18 tahun yang merokok menjadi sekitar 8,8 atau 8,9% ya. Penurunannya tidak begitu besar sebenarnya. Namun demikian karena penerapan yang cukup bervariasi tadi berlapis-lapis ya sehingga ada celah yang masih bisa terjadi dalam penerapan cukai tersebut ya di mana mungkin saja masyarakat beralih dari mengkonsumsi rokok yang harganya lebih mahal menjadi rokok yang harganya lebih murah, dan disinilah bedanya mungkin dengan penerapan cukai terhadap konsumsi terhadap minuman berpemanis tadi ya, di mana penerapan cukai bisa mendorong industri mengubah formula produknya menjadi mengandung gula lebih sedikit, namun terkait dengan tembakau hal itu nampaknya tidak akan bisa memperbaiki kondisi kesehatan masyarakat karena tembakau itu tidak dipengaruhi oleh dosis ya, tidak seperti gula ya, seperti tadi disampaikan juga oleh Pak Evan ya, sehingga tentu saja berbagai upaya penerapan kebijakan cukai tembakau ini juga harus diikuti dengan pemberian solusi ya terhadap para petani tembakau dan juga pekerja di dalam industri rokok ya, di mana tadi juga diberikan contohnya ya, sudah ada yang melakukan diversifikasi ya, mengubah tanaman tembakau menjadi tanaman-tanaman yang lain. Namun di akhir intinya adalah bahwa manfaat yang bisa diperoleh dengan peningkatan tarif tembakau dan juga harga rokok ini adalah ada banyak sekali ya, yaitu dari sisi kesehatan masyarakat, dari sisi pendapatan pemerintah dan juga pemerintah daerah, maupun dari sisi penerapan JKN. Baik, demikian ringkasan dari materi yang disampaikan oleh Pak Abdillah. Kita lanjut. Now we are continue with the question and answer session. I have some the committee already set the rules regarding this session. So we hope that you will write your question in the Google Form link. So committee, please put the slide and the address of the link. Yeah, okay. And please write your question in the provided link of Google Form. And please put the question or opinion if you have as brief as possible and also clear. You can write in Indonesian language or in English. Yeah, and after that I will read the question and then tell it to our resource person so they could give an answer. Is there already a question? So the committee already gathered some question, I believe. Yeah. Okay, so this is the first question from Ibu Judy. So it is addressed to Evan. So what influences the end result of the tax excise to a product on the final price paid by the consumer? So Evan, I hope that you can read the question on your own. yeah, it's quite lengthy, but I will give opportunity for you to answer the first question.
Thanks. I mean, I think, the Vietnam example is instructive for a very specific purpose. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is raise the price of the product, as I think you acknowledged there. Really what tax is the instrument that government has in order to influence the price the most. In some countries, in a small number of countries, government might have the ability to directly regulate a price, impose a price, etc. But in most countries, that's not the case, and the government doesn't set the final price. The challenge with the Vietnam example is that the ex-factory price is set by the industry, and the nature of the point that I was trying to make with Vietnam is that the incentive in the tax system, the way the tax is designed, it actually keeps the incentive for the industry to keep that ex-factory price low, and that's what we mean by then it creates an incentive for undershifting. So in order to increase the price in Vietnam, what we need to be able to do, for example, is to then not just raise the tax rate, because I think we've seen in that example that twice the tax rate has been raised and it didn't actually increase price, is that we need to engage in some sort of reform of the structure of the tax. And that is an ongoing work in Vietnam. I know there's a lot of people that within the broader finance architecture in Vietnam that have been working around reforming that tax structure to a mixed system. And so what that would ensure is that the retail prices or final prices that would likely would increase as a result of the tax increase. In terms of the work that goes on behind the scenes, I think it depends on the system within the country. The system under which tax policy is made. In Indonesia, we have a system whereby the Ministry of Finance has legislation that enables it to make significant changes to the rates on an annual basis based on the HJE price, etc. In Vietnam, they have a different system where they have almost a roadmap of sorts, where the government directly with Parliament decides this tax structure and a series of rates over a period of time, usually 5 or 10 year period. So they have a far more different systems. So it's all dependent as well on the systems within countries. In the Philippines, for example, what we saw is that it needs very explicit reforms within Parliament for changes to take place. So that can vary by country to country. I think the role of different sectors of government, whether it be the Ministry of Finance, the Revenue Authority, or Parliament, does vary. How long this takes, what we see is that in in Indonesia, we have tax changes every year. Towards the third quarter of every year, we have tax changes, and it takes almost the whole year for that to occur, for discussions within governments to occur. In Vietnam, these reforms have been ongoing for a long period of time, so it's not quick, and that can be a challenge as well. I think the current system in Vietnam has been people have been engaging on reforming the current system for about 6 or 7 years. There've been efforts to reform that, so they're not rapid processes as well.
Okay, thank you very much for the explanation. Now I hope that it will satisfy the Bu Judy. Please proceed to the next question. Okay, so this is to Bapak Abdillah from Andika Aji. Okay, so the question is there any comparison between the raise in the tobacco excise and the revenue of the country from that sector?
Yeah, yes, there are studies by Dr. Suarta Kosen calculating the cost of the health cost of tobacco consumption and also the revenue from the excise tax. And what I remember is that the cost is much higher than the revenue. Yeah, the cost is much higher than the revenue. I think 3 times higher than the revenue. So this is the case for tobacco. Yeah, but I think for tobacco, even if the revenue is higher than the cost, the health cost, we still have to decrease the cigarette consumption, because the law mandate, the health law and also the excise law mandated the government to decrease cigarette consumption, no matter what. No matter what. So regardless of the revenue, the government must decrease the cigarette consumption.
Okay, thank you, Pak Abdillah. Now we have another question. Okay, so this is from Marcen to Evan. So there's 2 questions actually. Okay.
Okay, this is a great question. What is an SSB? There is no, I don't want to say there is no clear definition, because that's not the case. But there are different definitions of a sugar-sweetened beverage. Firstly, let's start with a broad category of non-alcoholic beverages that includes bottled water, whether still or sparkling, fruit juices, energy drinks, sports drinks, sodas, etc. Generally, when we refer to sugar-sweetened beverages, we're referring to any drink which has, I want to get my definitions right, any drink that has basically sugar in it. So energy drinks, anything that has a calorie in it is considered by a broad definition sugary drinks, sugar-sweetened beverages. But that said, there are varying definitions of it, and that definition can vary quite a bit. In terms of what's most accessible to people and detrimental to health, I think that's an interesting question, because I think the reason around the sort of access is pretty clear. What we do know is that the energy drinks often have a very high amount of sugar in them. And in many cases, fruit juice drinks also have a particularly high sugar content in it. But people don't often realize just how much sugar is in it. So I think we often sort of see it as, well, people, when they think of sugary drinks or sugar-sweetened beverages, are thinking of the sodas. But in many cases, the fruit juices have similar to higher levels of sugar in them. And energy drinks often do as well. A big challenge comes in specifically the sort of the free sugars. And what we mean by the free sugars is sugars without significant other nutritional content. In terms of taste bud friendly beverages to workers, partly I think people are getting at what the culprits are in terms of what's the contribution to calories. I think that one of those first pictures I showed was, how many calories per person per day were they getting from sugar-sweetened beverages? And that first picture showed about 250 odd calories, 250 to 280 calories. What contributes to that is dependent from country to country. What we see is that in many, for example, in many African countries, we see that fruit juices are contributing a lot more to that, for example, than sodas. And I don't know what exactly the experience is in Indonesia as to what the contribution is to that. But in some countries, we see a lot more coming from the sodas. I think there is an interesting distinction here, because the question is made between bottled fruit juices and regular fruit juices. I think that's a distinction between people actually taking whole fruit and making juice from it at that point in time, as opposed to sort of the commercialized fruit juices. I think there's a big difference there, and it's difficult to, from an administrative perspective, it's difficult to tax fresh fruit juices, fruit juices that are squeezed fruit and squeezed whole. We might not want to do that as well. How we actually decide what to tax is the critical point here, because you don't end up wanting to tax some and not the others, and end up taxing the ones that are not necessarily, quote unquote, the culprits, that are the big contributors to it. And so it becomes a critical function. Milk products, for example, if we define SSBs too broadly, we end up taxing milk products. We might not want, I don't think, from a nutrition perspective, that we want to tax milk products. So it is very important as making very distinct decisions about what to tax and what not to tax. But again, taste bud friendly beverages, I think that ultimately, generally, you're thinking of sweet in that context. But yeah, what is considered an SSB versus what you want to tax are actually two different things. What we're starting to see also now is a bit more interest in trying to see SSBs more broadly, and trying to define them more broadly. And that's, I think, the way we're doing it now. In the work that we do with at WHO, we definitely are looking at a broader definition of sugary sweetened beverages to anything with sugar in them.
Okay. Yeah. So in the end, even though we are very helpful, to have the implementation of excise in the products that could cause negative effect to our health, but still we must, it should be accompanied by proper education to the community, so they could understand that maybe all kind of sugar in excess is actually dangerous to their health. Yeah. Okay, so we continue with the next question. Okay, this is to Pak Abdillah again from Lestari Octavia.
What would be the appropriate percentage?
Would be sufficient for public to control the public health problem.
Yeah. Okay, so we are talking about cigarette tax, cigarette excise, not the whole health tax, not the whole health tax. And yeah, of course, this is not enough, this is not enough. The excise tax is not enough to decrease the cigarette consumption. We in tobacco control, there are other policy like tax ban. We call it tobacco tobacco advertising, promotion, and sponsorship ban. So we have to ban the advertising on tobacco. Secondly, we have a smoke-free area, kawasan tanpa rokok. We have to enlarge, to implement effective smoke-free area, and also we have a pictorial health warning in the cigarette pack. Indonesia only 40%. Other country in ASEAN is 80%. So tobacco tax alone is not enough for eradicate the health problem. What the tobacco tax can do is to decrease the cigarette consumption, but it needs other policy measure also. And maybe your question is what rate, what excise rate that can be decreased, that can decrease the cigarette consumption. In Indonesia, that simple question is not simple to answer, because we have so many tariff. We have so many tariffs. In other country, it's a simple question and simple answer because they have only one tariff. Yeah. So our challenges is we have many challenges. First is increasing the tariff, and also the second is to simplify the structure. Yeah. And yeah, and at least we wanted to increase the all of tobacco product, all type of tobacco product or cigarette above the inflation rate and above the GDP per capita, the economic growth, yeah, above the inflation rate and economic growth. So let's say in the normal time, no pandemic, yeah, in the normal time we have a 5% inflation and maybe 4% economic growth. Then we propose to the government to increase twice, not only the same, but twice the inflation plus the economic growth. For 4 plus 5, 9, and then we multiply by 2, and then we propose the government to increase the excise and also the price by 18%. Yeah, so that is the rule of thumb or the common formula that we propose to the government every year.
Okay, thank you, Pak Abdillah. Is there any more question? Okay, still, yeah, from Andika Aji again to Evan.
Yeah, I think that's actually probably a question better answered by Abdillah. It's related mainly to Indonesia, but I mean I think in general in terms of the general trend in state income, if we look at the macro level in Indonesia specifically, I think the tax to GDP ratio in Indonesia is relatively low. It's low for two reasons. I think one is that Indonesia for many years has been less reliant on tax revenue for state revenue than some other countries. I think a lot of it because of the ability of the state to generate revenues from non-tax sources, and I think the result of it is that it's resulted in a very relatively narrow tax base. And that's I think why cigarette taxes is a very big contributor to state revenue. Secondly, because there's a high smoking prevalence rate, and you put them together, and it means that it's a relatively large number, and that and I think Abdillah spoke about the need to diversify tax a little bit in Indonesia, but we're not going to get the tax to GDP ratio in Indonesia closer to or above 15%. Which is really a level that people are starting to determine as one that's necessary for development in terms of building a proper social sector, and you can't do that without higher cigarette taxes in Indonesia because of the tax base. In terms of how it's collected, I think that's that's a sort of a separate sort of administrative issue, and I'm not sure that the volume of revenue is going to be dramatically affected by it, whether it's a central or local tax collection going forward. That said, I do think having a centralized, federalized system for cigarette taxes is probably a best way to go from an administrative perspective. I don't know, Abdillah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, Abdillah, please give your opinion regarding this, because this is also very relevant to your experience and expertise.
Okay. Regarding the first question, yes, cigarette tax is contributor to state revenue, but we have to treat the excise tax, yeah, the tobacco excise, not as a contributor. Yeah? There is a analogy of tobacco tax is like a fine, wearing mask fine. Yeah? In this COVID era, you have to wear a mask. When you do not wear a mask, then the government will fine you some amount of money. Yeah, and then the government cannot rely on this kind of fine. Yeah, and then if they rely on this kind of fine, then everybody will not wear mask. Yeah, so we can apply this kind of logic to the tobacco tax. Yeah, so tobacco tax is not a contributor to the state revenue. It is a fine fund, pajak denda. It is a dana denda, a fine fund to the state revenue. Yeah, and then but there's still, if we improve, if we improve the structure of tobacco tax, then we have a potential, we have a potential income, we have a potential increasing income. Yeah, so as you know, the structure of tobacco tax is very complicated. Yeah, let's say we simplify to one tariff, the highest one, the expensive one tariff, and then we have a bunch, we have a big increase of revenue. Yeah, we have an increase of revenue. So there is still a room for increasing revenue by simplifying or by improving the tobacco tax structure. Yeah, and then regarding the second question, I think what the local government can do to reduce the negative impact on smoking. Yes, they can do smoke-free area regulation, implementation, and also the what we call it outdoor advertising ban. Yeah, as you know that advertising is still allowed. Yeah, but outdoor advertising ban is in the area of local government, so they have the authority to ban it. Yeah, and then they can have a socialization, or they can have a dissemination on the impact of the health impact of tobacco consumption. Okay, okay.
Okay, thank you, Pak Abdillah. I believe we still have one more question. Yeah, this is the last question to Pak Abdillah again. Yeah.
How is it possible? Is it hand roll critique mean the human resources is far more than using the machine? Okay, so yes, the price of in reality, the price of hand rolled critique is much cheaper. Why it is much cheaper? First, because they pay much lower excise tariff. Yeah, much cheaper excise tariff. Yeah, and if you compare it, maybe the price for, sorry, the excise for SKT or the hand rolled critique it's only less than 50% than the machine one. Yeah, why it is much cheaper? Because they pay much cheaper excise tariff. Yeah, first, and the second one, yes, in terms of economics point of view, we have what we call it economies of scale. Yeah, economies of scale. So using machine, yeah, when you reach your economies of scale, then you will decrease the cost. Yeah, you will decrease the cost of yeah, and why the critique is much cheaper? Yeah, you can ask the producer. Yeah, you can ask the producer. But the main reason is because they pay much cheaper excise tariff. Okay.
So it is the different case with the handmade batik, ya Pak, ya, which is more expensive than the machine one. Okay, so I believe that's all the question. Yeah, there's probably a lot of more, but we don't have many times. Yeah, this is already the end of our session. Again, I would like to thank both Evan Bletcher and Pak Abdillah Hasan to become our distinguished speakers for this session and share your valuable experience and extensive knowledge in this field. I would return the session again to Dr. Grace, our MC.
Thank you. Thank you very much again for our moderator, Dr. Indah, and our two speaker, Dr. Evan Bletcher and also Dr. Abdillah Hasan. And also, of course, to you, all the participants who already posed very, very interesting questions. So before I close out the event today, I have several announcements. Kindly fill out the evaluation form in the link as shown on the chat box in YouTube, because it will prove your attendance, and you will get certificate based on your attendance. We will have a winner of best questions announced later in our social media outlet. So make sure you follow our social media. So it was my pleasure to be the master ceremony for today's webinar. We apologize for any inconvenience. I hope we have learned more on how health tax, no longer sales tax, can be used as a way of public health measures. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you again in our next webinar. I'm Grace Wange, signing off.
Yes. Thank you all. Yeah.